Don't let her touch the cake. She's low-class trash, Aubrey hissed to the wedding planner, loud enough for the guests at table 5 to hear. I stood there with the knife in my hand, beside the 3-tiered vanilla cake I'd offered to pay for. The cake I had baked, frosted, and decorated with trembling hands, just to feel useful on my son's special day. That moment, the air left my lungs. My son Chad didn't even look at me. He was standing next to her in his tuxedo, smiling like a mannequin, pretending not to hear, or maybe choosing not to. If you've ever been disrespected by someone you love, this story will speak to your heart. I lowered the knife slowly. People were staring, but no one said a word. The wedding planner mumbled something and took the knife from me, apologizing. To Aubrey, I stepped back, hands sticky with buttercream, face flushed with shame. The music was still playing. Laughter, clinking glasses, and soft jazz filled the hall, as if my humiliation had no sound. Aubrey leaned towards me and whispered, "Next time, don't dress like you're cleaning houses." Then she kissed my son on the cheek, right there in front of me. I waited for Chad to say something, anything, but he adjusted his tie and walked away. I wiped my hands on the napkin, slowly. People returned to their food. My place card had been moved to the back table, by the bathroom. I sat alone at the back, where the scent of disinfectant from the nearby bathroom mixed with the cold roast chicken on my plate. My name, Diane, was scribbled hastily in ballpoint pen, unlike the others' golden calligraphy. A detail, but cruel. From where I sat, I could see Chad and Aubrey beaming at the head table, surrounded by photographers, friends, and the remnants of our family. My sister Louise had sent her regrets. Her knees were bad. My cousin had a church retreat. Truth is, no one really shows up for the mother once the bride arrives. I stared at my wrinkled hands resting on my lap, still smelling faintly of vanilla. For months, I'd planned every part of this wedding I was allowed to touch. Flowers from my garden, handmade favors, hand-sewn napkins. I even sold my old jewelry to help pay for the caterer. I believed Chad would see me, that he'd know what all this cost me. A voice interrupted my thoughts. "You must be Diane," a soft, syrupy tone. Aubrey's mother, Celeste. She slid into the seat across from me like a queen visiting a peasant. Her pearls glistened under the amber lights. "I just wanted to thank you for trying. Everything's lovely in its own way." There was that smile, too smooth, too tight. I nodded, unsure what to say. "Oh, and do eat something. We wouldn't want you fainting and drawing attention." She stood, perfume lingering behind like a bruise. I didn't eat. Not the roast chicken, not the cold rolls, not the overpriced salad. My stomach was full. Of silence, of stares, of everything I wasn't allowed to say. I watched them toast with champagne I couldn't afford, dance to a song I used to hum when Chad was small. He once stood barefoot in the kitchen, clinging to my apron, begging for "just one more dance, Mama." Now he stood tall beside Aubrey, hands on her waist, eyes lost in her laughter. I sipped water from a glass rimmed in gold. It tasted bitter. The waiter leaned in. "Excuse me, Mom. They said this was your cake." He nodded discreetly toward the dessert table, where slices of my cake, the cake she'd called trash, were being served on delicate porcelain. I nodded, forcing a smile. "Best one here, honestly," he whispered, then walked away. A moment. A drop of kindness in a room full of ice. I pulled out the lace handkerchief from my purse, the one embroidered with my initials and my mother's wedding date. I always carried it. When Chad graduated, I wrapped his gift in it. When his father passed, I held it during the funeral, soaking in tears I never showed. Tonight, I dabbed the corner of my eye as a guest tripped, laughing onto the dance floor. They were so young, so rich with time, and yet so poor in gratitude. The band started playing at last, and I felt older than ever. The lights dimmed as the DJ called for the cake cutting. A cheer went up. I sat motionless, clutching my handkerchief like it could stop my heart from bruising further. I saw them walk toward the cake, the one I spent 12 hours baking, icing, decorating with tiny white roses piped by hand. I pictured that moment so many times. Chad holding the knife, calling me to stand beside him. "My mom made this," he'd say. "Isn't she amazing?" Instead, he held Aubrey's hand. She giggled, looking over her shoulder, and said, without irony, "Just hope it's not dry." The crowd laughed. They sliced it together, fed each other with exaggerated smiles for the camera. Someone shouted, "Speech! Speech!" Aubrey took the mic first. "I just want to thank my wonderful husband, my fabulous in-laws." She winked towards Celeste and her father. "And of course, all of you for coming. I know not everyone could afford gifts, but your presence is appreciated." Another laugh, another stab. Chad took the mic next. "And thank you to my mom for making the cake." A brief pause. That was it. No mention of the planning, the decorations, the months I'd spent saving pennies in a jar labeled wedding fund tucked inside my kitchen drawer. No look, no smile. I smiled anyway. I had to. Mothers don't ruin weddings, even when their hearts are cracking like overbaked meringue. But something was changing inside me, and I could feel it, like heat rising in a quiet kitchen. After the speeches, the music roared back and people flooded the dance floor. I slipped outside. The air was crisp, autumn brushing against my cheeks like a warning. In my purse, under the handkerchief, was a small ivory envelope, my wedding gift to them. I had written a letter inside, not money. I didn't have any left, just words. Words I had rewritten 5 times, always ending with, "May love guide you where pride cannot." But now my fingers trembled as I touched it. Something stopped me. Maybe it was the way Aubrey glanced past me like I was the cleaning staff. Maybe it was the way Chad looked through me, not at me. Maybe it was how the woman I raised could vanish so easily under the approval of someone who smelled of perfume and power. I sat on a stone bench near the parking lot, beside a flickering lamppost, alone like some ghost of weddings past. Then I saw them, Celeste and her husband, standing beside a black car, talking fast in whispers. I wasn't trying to listen, but when Celeste raised her voice, sharp and cold, it cut the air like glass. "Just keep the papers locked up until after the honeymoon. No one needs to know their real worth." Real worth? She looked around, then smiled and kissed her husband lightly. That's when I saw the document in his hands. Cream-colored, stamped. Something about it made my skin prickle. I clutched the envelope tighter. But I didn't walk in. Not yet. I stayed on that bench longer than I meant to. The sound of laughter drifted from the hall like it belonged to another world. I reached into my purse, not for the envelope this time, but for something older, something smaller. A photo. It was creased at the corners, the color faded, but the image still clung to life. Chad at 6 years old in his pajamas, flour smudged on his cheek, standing on a stool in our tiny kitchen, helping me bake his first birthday cake for his father. He was smiling. That kind of smile kids wear before they learn how the world works. He used to look at me like I was everything. I ran my finger over the image, pausing at his eyes. They were the same, just colder now. My chest ached. I remembered him coming home from college, so full of stories. The way he used to call me every Sunday like it was ritual. The day he brought Aubrey home, nervous and proud. "She's classy, Mom," he had said. "She'll open doors for me." I hadn't realized he meant closing the one we shared. The photograph trembled slightly in my hand as the breeze picked up. I held it close to my heart. It smelled faintly of cinnamon and old wood, like memory. The lamp overhead flickered again, and suddenly I didn't feel small, not forgotten, just patient. I stood slowly, tucking the picture back into my wallet. There were truths hidden under designer smiles, and I was ready to find them. Back inside, The reception was winding down. Plates cleared, ties loosened, heels abandoned under tables. But the music still pulsed like a stubborn heartbeat. I kept the envelope in my hand, fingers pressing its edges as I approached the gift table, that glossy shrine to expectations. Wrapped boxes towered like monuments. Gold bows, Tiffany blue paper, envelopes heavy with bills. My envelope looked small, plain, like me, I suppose. I hesitated, then I placed it down. Not on top, not in the center, beneath the others, hidden, but not surrendered. Diane? I turned. Aubrey stood there, veil tucked back, a champagne flute dangling in one hand. She didn't look drunk, just tired of pretending. "I saw you out there earlier," she said. "Everything okay?" It wasn't concern, just a performance for anyone nearby. A bride doing her obligatory mother-in-law check. "I needed air," I said simply. She sipped, then added with a smirk, "You know, next time, maybe let the professionals handle the cake." My lips parted slightly, but no words came. Then, and I remember this clearly, she leaned in and whispered, "Chad's moved on, Diane. He's with me now. So, try not to hold on too tightly." Her breath smelled like sugar and something sour beneath it. I didn't respond. Not then. I just looked at her deeply and said the only thing I could. "You should open your gifts carefully. Some things aren't what they seem." And I walked away. But I saw her face change, just for a moment. The next morning I woke in my small apartment to silence, the kind that fills your chest like cold water. I boiled water for tea but didn't drink it. My eyes kept drifting to the invitation still pinned on the fridge. "Chad and Aubrey, forever begins here." The gold letters had started to curl at the edges. I almost tossed it in the trash. But something stopped me. Instead, I picked up the phone. "Good morning, this is Evelyn, Events by E," the voice chirped on the other end. It was the wedding planner, the one Aubrey barked orders at like a servant. I hesitated. "This is Chad's mother, Diane." A pause, then a change in her tone, warmer, more careful. "Oh, Mrs. Langford. Yes, I remember you. I wanted to ask, who paid for the venue?" Another pause, then carefully. "Well, the bride's family handled most of the upfront costs. We were told it was all under the Montclairs. That's Aubrey's maiden name. Did they pay in full?" Silence again. Then a sigh. "Let's just say there were some outstanding adjustments. I'm sorry, I shouldn't." "You've said enough." I hung up. Something in my gut twisted. Not with anger, but clarity. Aubrey's family wasn't what they seemed. Her pearls, her smirks, her little digs, they were a mask. And Chad. Chad had chosen the mask. But masks crack. I opened my drawer and took out a box I hadn't touched in years. Inside, receipts, letters, photos, proof of who I was, and maybe who she wasn't. I spread the contents of the box across my kitchen table. It was like opening a time capsule no one had asked for. Not neat, not pretty, but honest. There were letters from Chad, crayon scrawls from second grade, college essays he wanted me to proofread, one postcard from spring break he sent just to say, "Miss you, Mom." Then a few newspaper clippings I had kept. One about the Montclair family, Aubrey's parents. It was a small piece from 6 years ago. Local business shuts down amid legal dispute. No major scandal, just vague mentions of financial restructuring and private settlements. But I remembered it now. Celeste Montclair's name was there, tucked between euphemisms. I kept digging and found something else, an old voicemail I'd saved, from Chad, the night he got engaged. "Hey, Mom," his voice crackled, full of excitement. "Aubrey said yes. Her parents want to meet you. They're big on appearances, so maybe don't bring up the bakery or anything too homey, okay? Love you." I had laughed it off then. Now, it felt like a tiny knife. Appearances. That's all this had been. I picked up my phone again, not to call Chad, but to call Louise, my sister. She was my only real ally left, even if we hadn't spoken in months. I needed her eyes, her mind, her sense of memory. She'd always been the one who noticed what others didn't. When she picked up, I simply said, "You were right about her, and I need your help." Louise arrived 2 hours later, in a coat too big and perfume too strong, carrying 2 coffees and a look I hadn't seen since our mother's funeral, tired but ready to dig. She set the cups down and scanned the table. "Lord have mercy," she muttered. "Looks like a woman scorned and armed with archives." I smiled for the first time that day. She called me low-class trash Lou, in front of strangers, then smiled like she was saying, "Bless you." Louise sat down slowly. "Tell me everything," I told her. From the cake, to the whisper, to the overheard conversation in the parking lot. Her face didn't move much, but her fingers tapped the coffee lid harder with every word. When I finished, she leaned back and stared at the ceiling like it might offer divine confirmation. "I never liked her," she said finally. "Too polished, too perfect. And that smile? Fake as a church raffle. I think her family's in debt," I said, "or hiding something. And Chad's wrapped up in it without even knowing." Louise nodded. "And you've got receipts." "Some," I whispered. "But it's not just about money, Lou. It's about respect, about truth. I gave Chad everything. I don't want revenge. I want him to see." Louise reached for the envelope I hadn't given, opened it, read the letter I'd written. She looked up, eyes glassy. "This is your gift?" she asked. I nodded. "Well," she said, folding it carefully, "maybe it's time they learned what a real gift looks like." Later that afternoon, Louise and I sat in silence, the kind only sisters can share. Not awkward, just full of memories, of bruised hopes. She stirred her coffee with a spoon that clinked against porcelain, the sound oddly comforting. Then her eyes drifted to a small teacup on the shelf. It was dusty, cracked along the rim. "You kept this?" she asked softly. I nodded. "Mom's." Inside it, tucked and folded since before Chad was born, was a key. Louise raised her brows. "Is that what I think it is?" "Dad's old safety box," I said. "At the credit union." We had never emptied it. After he passed, I just couldn't bring myself to. Too much pain, too many ghosts. But now, I went to the cabinet, took the cup down gently and lifted the key. Cold, heavy, as if waiting for this moment. "I want to know what's inside," I said. Louise smiled, just a flicker. "Well then, put on your coat." At the bank, they led us to a dim, quiet room with a table and a small steel drawer. My fingers trembled as I turned the key. The lock clicked, a sound like unlocking a part of myself I'd sealed off years ago. Inside, wrapped in cloth, were documents, old titles, deeds, and something else. A bundle of letters, all addressed to be opened when the time comes. My father's handwriting. Louise covered her mouth. Diane. The time, I realized, had come. I opened the bundle with slow hands, careful not to tear the paper, like it might bleed memory if I moved too fast. The first letter was dated April 1979, the year my father bought the land we grew up on. His handwriting was firm, unshaken. "To my daughters, if you're reading this, something in our family has shifted. Maybe the world changed, maybe you did. But what I leave you isn't money, it's truth. Truth, like land, can be buried, but it never disappears." Louise whispered. He always had a poet's soul. I kept reading. The letters unfolded like breadcrumbs through time, detailing investments, land acquisitions, quiet partnerships he had made. Nothing flashy, just solid, patient planning. Then came the revelation. He had bought partial shares in the Montclair family's original company, quietly. An old friend had offered him a chance to invest back when Aubrey's father needed funding. My father had helped, discreetly, legally, and wisely. But the documents showed something more. When the company failed, my father had acquired silent claims over certain remaining assets. Not controlling interest, but enough. Louise's eyes widened. Diane, if this is real. It is, I whispered, running my finger along the seal of one document. If true, Aubrey's family had built their image on assets partly tied to my family's name. All the talk of status, of class. It was a borrowed crown, worn with false pride. I sat back, dizzy. The humiliation from the wedding echoed in my chest. But now I held something stronger than shame. I held proof. That night I didn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table, the letters and documents laid out like a map of buried dignity finally unearthed. I didn't feel victorious. I felt still, like a woman who had finally stopped apologizing to the world for taking up space. I made tea in the old kettle Chad once burned popcorn in when he was 12. I remembered scolding him, then laughing as we aired out the kitchen together. That memory, sweet, ordinary, felt like it belonged to someone else now. I didn't want revenge, but I couldn't go back to silence. At dawn, I typed a letter. Not to Chad, not yet. To Celeste Montclair. I kept it short. Dear Mrs. Montclair, you may want to review the enclosed documentation regarding your family's current financial posture, including the quiet claims my father held in the assets you present as your own. Consider this an invitation to humility, something I suspect you once had, but misplaced somewhere between pearls and deception. Respectfully, Diane Langford. I sealed it with the same calm I used to wrap school lunches. Louise read it and let out a soft, admiring chuckle. You're not yelling. That's going to scare her more. Good, I said. Because this time, I want them to feel what I felt. Not rage, but exposure. I tucked the envelope into my coat pocket, alongside my father's documents and a single slice of that wedding cake, frozen since that night. Let them taste the truth. I didn't use a courier. I delivered the envelope myself. Drove across town in my old Ford, dressed in a navy coat that still smelled of lavender sachets from the closet. My hands were steady on the wheel. The truth, it turns out, makes your spine straighten, not with arrogance, but clarity. The Montclairs lived in a white-pillared home that pretended not to be cracking beneath the surface. Fake flowers on the porch, too many locks on the door. A curtain twitched as I approached. Celeste answered after one ring. Her robe was silk, her smile not quite ready. Mrs. Langford, she said, surprised. Is something wrong? Not at all, I replied, handing her the envelope. Just something I thought you might want to see. A little family history. She looked down at the envelope, and for a second, just one, I saw it. A flicker of fear, or recognition. I'm afraid I don't. You will, I said gently. She started to close the door. And Celeste? She paused. Please stop calling people trash, unless you've taken a long, hard look at your own attic. Her hand froze on the knob. But I didn't wait for a response. I walked back to the car with no music, no applause, just the sound of leaves underfoot and my heart beating steadily. Justice doesn't always come in courtrooms or headlines. Sometimes it arrives in a plain envelope placed in trembling hands. Sometimes it wears a quiet coat and drives an old Ford, and sometimes it smiles as it leaves. Days passed. No calls, no messages, not from Celeste, not from Chad, and certainly not from Aubrey. But silence, I was learning, had its own voice, and I was learning to hear it. Louise checked in every morning, just to say, still no fire from their end. And I'd answer, not yet. We made a little ritual of it, like waiting for bread to rise. You don't rush heat, you trust the yeast. On the third day, I stopped checking my phone. Instead, I went to the garden behind my building. The roses I'd used at the wedding had begun blooming again. They were simple, cream-colored. Not the showy hybrids from florists, but mine, grown with my hands. I clipped a few, wrapped them in paper, and placed them in a vase near my father's photo. Thank you, I whispered, for the seeds, for the truth. By sunset, a letter came. Not a text, not an email. A proper envelope slid under my door. The handwriting was unmistakable. Chad's. I stared at it for a long time before picking it up. The weight of a son's silence, now wrapped in paper. I didn't open it right away. Instead, I set it beside the cake slice I'd kept in the freezer, still untouched, still waiting. Some things, I thought, deserved the right setting, the right moment. Not rushed, not wasted. Let him wait a little. Let them all sit in their silence. I had waited long enough. I opened it the next morning. Not because I was ready, but because I realized it didn't matter anymore. Inside, 3 pages, folded with care. His handwriting hadn't changed much since high school. Slightly slanted, a little rushed, but familiar. I ran my thumb across the paper as if I could touch him through it. "Mom," it began. "I've read your letter a dozen times and I didn't know what to say. At first I was angry, then ashamed. Now I'm just quiet. And maybe that's what I needed to be all along. Aubrey told me what happened at the wedding. I won't defend her words. I wish I had spoken up. I didn't. That shame is mine." I read slowly, tears catching at the edge of each sentence. "I know now what I didn't want to admit, that you've always carried this family, that you sacrificed more than I ever saw, that the cake, the flowers, the money, they weren't help, they were love. Then, and about the documents, Aubrey's parents are panicking. I confronted them. You were right. They've been hiding debts for years. Aubrey didn't know the full extent, but she's shaken." He ended with one line that made my chest break open. "Mom, if I chose the wrong side, is there still a way back to yours?" I closed the letter gently. Not with rage, not with triumph, just with the quiet truth that echoed through the kitchen. Now he knew. Now they all knew. And now I could decide what came next. Later that evening, Louise and I sat across from each other, her reading glasses perched on her nose, Chad's letter in her hands. She read it twice, then laid it flat on the table like a fragile truth. "Well," she said, exhaling, "he finally grew up a little." I nodded but didn't speak. The weight of forgiveness isn't light, even when it's deserved. It presses on you, asks you to carry the memory and the mercy side by side. Louise sipped her tea. "You know what I think?" "What?" "You gave him something she never could. Not money, not status. A mirror." I looked up. "A mirror," she repeated. "You showed him who he really was, and who he wasn't ready to become." I glanced at the freezer. The cake was still there, the slice untouched. It had become more than dessert now. It was a relic, a reminder, a quiet testament to what had been served and what had been swallowed. Louise leaned in. "You going to meet him?" "I don't know yet." "You don't have to forgive all at once," she said. "You just have to decide if his voice still matters to you." That landed deep. I stood, walked to the window. Outside, children played in the courtyard, their laughter chasing each other like birds in flight. It used to sound like that in our house, before silence came to stay. "I don't hate him," I said finally. Louise smiled softly. "That's how you know you're stronger." I wasn't healed, but I wasn't bleeding either. 2 days later, a card arrived. No email, no text. A proper card, cream-colored with a simple embossed border. My name handwritten on the front. No flourishes, just Diane. Inside, "Dinner at our place. No guests, just us. Please come." Signed, Chad. It was quiet in my kitchen when I read it, as if the walls were waiting with me. I stared at the card for a long time. The word "our" clung to my skin like cold water. Did our mean Chad and Aubrey, or had something shifted? Louise said, "Go. Let him look you in the eye. See if he can stand in his own truth." So I dressed simply. A soft gray sweater, black slacks. No jewelry except the necklace Chad made me in 2nd grade, 3 plastic beads and a tarnished heart. I arrived 5 minutes early. Old habit. The house was too big for its warmth. clean, modern, but hollow, like money had decorated it without love. Chad opened the door. He looked tired, a little older than a week ago. His tie was gone, sleeves rolled up, like the son I used to know. "Hi, Mom," he said. Quiet. "Hi." A beat. "I'm glad you came." "I'm not sure why I did," I answered honestly. We stood there for a moment longer. Then he stepped aside. "Please, come in." I crossed the threshold with careful steps, the way you enter a room that once hurt you, not as a guest, not as a mother even, but as the one holding the truce. He led me to the dining room. The table was set for 3, but only 2 seats were pulled out. The third, at the far end, remained tucked in, untouched. I noticed that first. "Aubrey's not joining us?" I asked. Chad shook his head slowly. "She left this morning, went to stay with her parents for a while." I nodded, unsure how I felt. Not relief, not grief, just air returning to a closed room. He pulled out my chair. I sat down, hands in my lap. He sat across from me. "I cooked." I raised an eyebrow. "Okay." He smirked faintly. "I reheated something from the Italian place down the street." I didn't laugh. Neither did he, fully. He served me slowly, careful, like each gesture was an apology. Pasta, salad, bread still warm. I noticed his hands trembling slightly as he poured the water. Then came the silence. "I don't know where to start," he said finally. "Then don't start with words," I replied. "Just sit." And so we did. Forks clinked softly against plates. The candle between us flickered. Outside, the wind brushed against the window, but inside, there was stillness. I looked at him, really looked. The boy who used to fall asleep on my chest after thunderstorms. The man who let me stand alone in a crowd while his wife called me names. Both were sitting here now. He finally met my eyes. "I miss you," he whispered. Tears welled in mine. Not because I believed him yet, but because I believed he meant it. After dinner, we moved to the living room. The lights were low, the fireplace humming quietly. He offered coffee. I declined. Instead, I handed him something, the photograph, the one from my wallet. Chad, 6 years old, flour on his cheek, barefoot in the kitchen. He stared at it for a long time. "I remember this," he said. "Dad had just yelled at me for breaking the eggs. You told him to hush." "You were trying," I said. That mattered more to me. He nodded slowly. His fingers trembled slightly as he handed the photo back. "Mom, I didn't see it before. How much you did. I don't know what I thought, that we needed to look richer. That Aubrey's world made me more." I looked at him, voice steady. "You were already more. You were mine." He looked down, ashamed. "I let her talk to you like you were beneath her," he whispered, "because I was afraid if I stood up to her, she'd see how much I still needed you." There it was, the one thing he never knew. "Chad," I said softly, "love that hides isn't love. It's fear wearing nice shoes." He laughed through a tear. "That sounds like something Dad would have said." "No," I replied. "That's something you just lived through." We sat in silence again. But this time, it didn't ache. It breathed. And as I looked around the room, his house, his life, I realized something. He wasn't the only one starting over. So was I. The next morning, Chad called. "She came back to pack," he said. "Aubrey, she's not staying." I didn't ask where she was going. I didn't need to. Women like Aubrey always have a cushion waiting somewhere. Someone else's couch, someone else's pocket. "She said something strange before she left," Chad continued. "She asked if I was ready to be seen with low-class family now." I paused. "And what did you say?" He sighed. "I told her the only class she ever taught me was how not to treat people." That silence between us, it held something new. Respect. He continued. "She left her rings on the counter. Said they were worth more than the car I used to drive." I didn't ask if that was true. Worth is such a funny word. She also left the envelope, he added, the one you gave her mom. I tensed. She saw it? She read it, and she looked afraid. A pause. Why did you send it to her, Mom? I answered softly, because truth has a sound, and I wanted her to hear it in a quiet room without anyone clapping. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then, I think she knew, deep down, that everything she built was borrowed. Maybe, I said, but now you know what was earned. A long silence stretched between us again. Then Chad asked quietly, "Can we start over, you and me?" I didn't answer right away. Some questions are better held for a moment, like a fragile heirloom passed down with care. That weekend, Chad came over. No Aubrey, no pretense. Just my son, in a worn sweater and jeans, carrying a bag of groceries like he used to in high school when we baked together. "I didn't know what you needed," he said, setting the bag down. "So I got flour, eggs, cinnamon, and," he smiled shyly, "a new cake knife. The old one had gone missing after the wedding." I took it from his hands. It was simple, stainless steel, the kind that cuts clean and doesn't pretend to be more than it is. We didn't say much at first, just moved around the kitchen, familiar patterns. I sifted flour. He greased the pans. We worked in rhythm again, mother and son, with music playing low and the scent of vanilla filling the room. "You know," he said, watching the batter swirl, "I always thought your kitchen felt safer than any house I've ever lived in." I looked up. "It still is, for the ones who enter with respect." He nodded, eyes damp but clear. I handed him the whisk. He stirred slowly. "You didn't deserve what happened, Mom, and I'm not asking you to forget it. I just want to be the son who earns his way back." I placed my hand over his. "You don't need to earn me. Just treat me like I'm not disposable." He swallowed hard. "Never again." The oven beeped, and for the first time in years, the silence between us was warm, not empty. We sat at the small kitchen table while the cake baked, the same table where I'd helped him with math, where he'd cried after his first heartbreak, where I once told him he could be anything. He reached for the photograph again, the one of him in flour and pajamas. He studied it like he was trying to time travel through paper. "You know," he said, voice soft, "I used to think that cake you made for Dad's birthday was magic. The way it made him smile, the way it made you seem like you could fix anything." I smiled faintly. It wasn't magic. It was survival. Back then, a smile was all I could afford. He looked at me with something heavier than guilt, understanding. "I let her throw that cake in your face," he whispered. "No," I corrected gently. "You let her throw me in your shadow." He nodded, the shame visible in the way he hunched forward, elbows on knees. "But I'm not in your shadow anymore," I added. "I'm standing in my own light now, and I intend to stay there." The timer rang. We pulled the cake from the oven. Golden brown, the scent of cinnamon wrapping around us like memory. He looked at it and asked, "Can I take half home?" I smiled. "Only if you leave the knife here." He laughed, really laughed, and for a moment we weren't broken, people patching wounds. We were just a mother and son, with something sweet cooling on the counter. The next morning, Celeste Montclair showed up at my door. I recognized the knock before I saw her face. That sharp, delicate tapping meant to sound polite, but always carried like a demand. I opened the door slowly. She stood there in a tailored coat, not a hair out of place, holding her designer handbag like a shield. "Diane," she said. "Celeste," I replied, letting the name taste bitter in my mouth. She looked around, then stepped in without waiting for an invitation. Some habits never change. "I came to speak," she said, sitting at my table without asking. I didn't offer coffee. "I read the documents," she continued. "And I won't lie, they complicate things. For my family, for our image." I raised an eyebrow. "Truth tends to do that." She exhaled slowly. "I underestimated you." "No," I said. "You erased me. Then you dressed that erasure in pearls." She flinched, just slightly. "I'm not here to grovel," she added quickly. "I didn't expect you to," I replied. "Pride's expensive. You've already paid enough to keep it." She was quiet for a moment, scanning the room. The modest curtains, the old photo of Chad in the hallway. "I don't know what you plan to do with those papers," she said. I met her eyes. "I plan to keep them, not to destroy you, just to protect what's mine." She stood. We didn't hug. We didn't shake hands. She turned at the door. "I see you now." I closed it behind her, not softly, but firmly. A week later, I was invited to a charity gala Chad had agreed to host. It was public, polished, the kind of event Aubrey used to adore. But her seat beside him remained empty. He spotted me near the entrance. For a moment, he looked like a boy again, unsure, searching the crowd for a safe place to land. When our eyes met, he nodded, hand gently placed over his heart. I returned the gesture. No smile, just presence. As the evening went on, I heard whispers around me. "That's his mother? She's the one who... Did you hear what she did with the Montclair papers?" I didn't respond. Let the stories swirl like smoke. I was used to being unseen. Tonight, I chose to be unbothered. A reporter approached me gently. "Mrs. Langford, do you have any comment about the Montclair family?" I met her gaze calmly. Only that sometimes truth arrives late, but it always comes dressed for the occasion. She blinked, then smiled, realizing she wasn't getting anything more. Later, as Chad gave his speech, speaking of second chances, gratitude, humility, his eyes found me more than once. He didn't name me, didn't point, but I was there, a quiet presence behind the curtain of his words. And when the applause came, I didn't clap, I just listened. Because dignity doesn't always need a microphone. Sometimes it just sits in the back row, watching the world shift silently. 2 days after the gala, I went to the bank to finalize the quiet claim my father had left behind. I expected forms, signatures, a quiet nod from the manager. What I didn't expect was the woman who greeted me at the counter. "Mrs. Langford." I looked up. She was young, kind-eyed, with an olive blouse and warm voice. "I'm Julia. My grandmother knew your father. She always said he was the only man in town who gave her a loan without making her feel small." I blinked, caught off guard. "Your grandmother?" "Teresa. She ran the sewing shop on Mulberry." I remembered her. Tall, proud, always smelled of lavender starch. She had hemmed my wedding dress. "I'll be handling the final transfers," Julia said. "And if you'd like, I can walk you through the legacy clause, the one your father attached." "My father added a clause?" She nodded, producing a small envelope. "He wrote a note, in case his daughters ever claimed their rights." With trembling hands, I opened it. "To my girls, land and money are only tools. But truth, that's the real inheritance. Use it to plant peace, not poison." I pressed the letter to my chest. Julia smiled. He was a rare kind of man. He taught me how to be a rarer kind of woman. By the time I left the bank, the paperwork was filed, not to hurt anyone, just to secure a future where no one could ever call me less than again, and mean it. That night I sat at my writing desk, not to draft revenge, not to issue demands, but to write something I had put off for too long, my own will. Not just the legal kind, a real one. The kind a woman writes when she's finally done being invisible. I lit a candle and opened a fresh notebook. The first line came easily. "To my son, Chad, I forgive you. Not because he asked, but because I needed space where bitterness used to live." I continued. "I leave you the recipe box. Every cake, every meal, every memory kneaded into flour and salt. I hope one day you'll read it like scripture. To the daughter I never had. If she should ever arrive, I leave the lace handkerchief. May she use it for tears that are earned, not wasted. To whoever finds this in the years to come, you do not need a title or a name that shines. You only need truth. That is what endures." When I finished, I closed the notebook and placed it beside the cake knife. Now washed, now home. This wasn't a document for lawyers. It was a declaration of dignity, of lessons learned, and of a woman who chose, after everything, not to scream, but to write. Because some legacies aren't written in wealth. They're stitched in forgiveness, sealed in silence, and passed down like the scent of vanilla through a warm house on a cold morning. A week later, on a Sunday morning, there was a knock at my door. Soft, hesitant, nothing like Celeste's. I opened it to find Aubrey. She wasn't dressed for war this time. No heels, no makeup, just jeans, a sweater, and tired eyes that had clearly learned something about sleep and sorrow. "Hi," she said, voice barely audible. I didn't speak. Not yet. She swallowed hard. "I'm not here to defend myself. I know I was cruel. I know I humiliated you. I can't take that back." I leaned against the doorframe. The air between us felt heavy, not with hatred, but with the weight of words waiting to be said. "I didn't grow up with people like you," she continued. "Where I came from, image was everything. I saw your love as weakness, but now I see. You were the strongest woman in the room." I studied her face. For the first time, it didn't wear pride like perfume. "I didn't come to be forgiven," she added. "I just came to say thank you." "For what?" I asked, voice steady. "For raising a man who could admit he was wrong." That pierced deeper than I expected. I didn't invite her in, but I nodded. "Take care of yourself, Aubrey." She nodded back. No dramatics, just something that felt almost like closure. And when she turned and walked away, I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt release. Not every ending comes with a slammed door. Some just close gently and stay closed. It was late October when I finally returned to my garden. The roses had faded into hips and thorns, but the soil was still soft. I pulled on my gloves and dug gently, placing bulbs for spring, daffodils, tulips, and crocuses. Planting, I've learned, is its own kind of faith. You bury something and believe it will return better. Chad came by in the afternoon. No announcement, no fanfare, just a knock and a smile with a box in his hands. "What's this?" I asked. He opened it to reveal a stack of printed photos. Us. From years ago. Some I hadn't seen in decades. Birthdays, vacations, his first day of school. "I thought we could make an album," he said. "Start putting the truth in order." I sat beside him on the porch. The sun was soft, shadows long. We flipped through images, moments stitched in paper and ink. There was one of me holding him in the hospital, hair a mess, eyes full of fire. "You were always strong," he whispered. I smiled. No, I was tired, but I didn't let that stop me. He looked at me then, not like a son trying to win back affection, but like a man seeing his foundation for the first time. And I realized this wasn't repair. It was regrowth, one bulb at a time, one photo at a time, one truth at a time. Because the garden always remembers who kneels in the dirt and who just walks past it. The first Saturday of November, Chad invited me to his apartment. No event, no reason, just come for coffee. I want to try baking something. I laughed when I arrived. Flour on his shirt, a dish towel over his shoulder like he was running a diner. The kitchen smelled like vanilla and burnt edges, which made me smile. On the counter sat a simple cake. It leaned slightly. The icing was uneven, but it was his. "I followed your cinnamon bunt recipe," he said proudly. "Did you read the note at the bottom?" "What note?" "The one that says not to open the oven door before 30 minutes. His face dropped. "That explains the crater in the middle." We both laughed. Not polite, not forced, the kind that comes from healed places. He cut 2 slices, handed me a plate, and sat across from me. "I used to think cake was just food," he said. "It's never just food," I replied. "It's presence, memory, effort. That's what makes it sweet." He nodded, taking a bite, wincing slightly. "A little dry." "Then pour more coffee," I said, grinning. For a while we sat in comfortable quiet. A window open, the cool air mixing with the scent of cinnamon. And then Chad said, almost to himself, "I wish Dad could see us now." "He does," I whispered. "In everything we fix with our hands, and in everything we forgive with our hearts." The cake wasn't perfect, but we were trying. And sometimes, trying is enough. On a soft, cloudy afternoon, Louise stopped by. She brought a pie and something else. A small wrapped bundle I didn't recognize at first. "This belongs to you," she said, placing it in my lap. I unwrapped it slowly. It was the lace handkerchief, the one I'd always carried for moments that cracked me open. The one I'd sent with Louise to keep during the mess of the wedding. A quiet symbol of who I was when no one else seemed to remember. "I kept it," she said, her voice tender. "After the wedding, I didn't want it stained with that day." I held it in my hands now. The lace soft but strong. "There's something holy in the things we keep," I whispered. We sat in the living room, sharing slices of pie and memories that tasted sweeter with distance. Louise told stories from when we were girls, sneaking cookies, hiding love letters, fighting over our mother's radio. "I'm proud of you, you know," she said, looking at me deeply. "You didn't destroy them. You didn't scream. You stood your ground with grace." "I didn't want revenge," I said. "Just my reflection back. And you got it." That night, I placed the handkerchief in a cedar box beside my will, my father's letters, and the family photograph Chad had framed for me, not as relics, but as proof that I had lived through betrayal, silence, and humiliation, and still chose dignity, even when no one was watching. A few weeks later, as the leaves turned brittle and golden, Chad stopped by again, this time with something in his hand, a key. "This was for the old house," he said, placing it in my palm. "I found it in a drawer. Thought you might want it." I stared at it for a moment. It was the same key that once opened every chapter of my life, the home I scrubbed clean every Sunday, the one where I raised a boy into a man who forgot, then remembered. I ran my thumb along the grooves, feeling years pressed into metal. "It still fits the front door," Chad added. "I made sure." I smiled faintly. Doors remember hands, even after they're shut. He looked at me with something close to awe. "I think I needed you to remind me how to come home. Not just with keys," I said, "with heart." We didn't say much else. But as he left, I stepped outside and looked across the street, at nothing in particular. Just the wind moving through branches like a whispered hymn. I held that key a while longer. It didn't burn. It didn't sting. It simply felt earned, not as a symbol of return, but as a reminder. The same door that once closed on me now waited quietly, for no one's permission. Because respect isn't something you beg to be let in for. It's something you carry with you until the door opens by itself. The first snow fell quietly that December. I was in the living room arranging the shelf above the fireplace when I noticed something new. A frame, simple wood, no glass, just a photograph slid inside, placed gently between the cinnamon candle and a vase of dried hydrangeas. It was the wedding cake. My cake, the one Aubrey had dismissed as low class. But this photo, taken by someone I hadn't seen, showed it untouched, perfect, the roses piped by my own hand, a candlelit glow behind it, no insults, no faces, just the work itself. I stared at it for a long time. Chad had left it during his last visit without a word. No note, no explanation, just recognition. I ran my fingers along the frame, heart tightening in that strange way pain and grace often arrive, together. Not everything needed to be said out loud. This was his apology, his offering, his way of saying, "You mattered." I see it now. I placed the frame beside my father's letters and the key. Symbols of silence overcome, of truth reclaimed. I didn't cry. I just stood there in the golden quiet of my home, watching snow gather outside the window, and for the first time in a long while, I felt full, not with pride, but with peace. Because sometimes justice isn't loud. It's a picture no one expected you to keep, a gift you didn't ask for, and a truth finally framed. On Christmas Eve, I returned to the old house, not to move in, that chapter was done, but to walk its garden once more, the one my father planted, the one I tended through years of noise and neglect. Chad met me there, keys in hand, scarf pulled tight. I thought we could light a candle, he said, lifting a small lantern. For Dad, for you, for what we lost and found. I followed him through the gate. The roses had long since retreated for winter, but their roots were sleeping just beneath, waiting. As we reached the porch, he paused. "Do you want to open it?" he asked, offering me the key. I took it. My fingers didn't tremble this time. The lock turned easily. The door opened with a soft groan, not a protest. Inside, the air smelled like dust and pine wood. I stepped in, not as a guest, not as a memory, but as a woman who had once been erased, now returned in ink. We stood in silence, letting the house breathe us in again. He lit the lantern and placed it by the old fireplace. "You know," he whispered, "this place feels warmer with you in it." I smiled, not with sorrow, not with longing, just truth. And when we walked back outside, the wind was gentle, brushing my coat like a blessing. The same door that once shut in my face now opened with grace, because healing, like justice, isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just a quiet lock finally turning for the right hands. New Year's Day came with frost on the windows and quiet in my home. The good kind. The kind that lets you hear your own heart beating without interruption. I set the table for one, not out of loneliness, out of ceremony. My mother used to do that, even when no one visited. She'd lay a plate, light a candle, pour a cup of tea. "We set the table for dignity," she'd say, "not just company." So I did. A slice of the cinnamon cake, fresh tea, a cloth napkin folded with care. Then I added something new. The photograph of the cake, now framed in wood, the lace handkerchief, and the notebook with my will, my real will, filled with recipes, memories, lessons. Everything a woman leaves behind that isn't land or gold. I lit a candle, and I whispered thanks for my father's quiet foresight, for Louise's fierce loyalty, for a son who returned, not as a boy, but as a man unafraid to kneel at the altar of truth. And yes, even for Aubrey. She taught me something too, that not all storms arrive to destroy. Some come only to clear the air. As I sipped my tea, I felt it again. That stillness, that quiet grace earned not from winning, but from withstanding, from planting dignity in soil no one thought would bear fruit, and watching it bloom, not for them, but for me. That evening, I sat at my desk once more and began writing a letter. Not for Chad, not for Louise, for a woman I haven't met yet. I addressed it simply. To the mother they forget. The words flowed easily. Not because I was healed beyond hurt, but because I had finally made peace with it. You are not crazy. You are not a burden. You are not too much. They simply forgot how to carry what you gave them. Let them forget. You will remember. The meals you made, the beds you folded, the holidays you held together with tape and tears. They will one day realize what they called nothing was everything. I folded the letter and slipped it into an envelope, tucked it behind the framed photograph. No one needs to find it today, maybe not even in my lifetime, but one day, some woman, in her quiet kitchen, heart cracked from words she never deserved, will see that envelope, and she'll know she was never alone, because we've all stood at the back table. We've all been called names that taste like rust, and we've all waited, not for applause, but for the return of our own name, spoken with respect. I placed the letter beside the others. Then I turned off the light. Outside the wind stirred. But inside everything was still, because truth, once written, never disappears. It simply waits to be found. The next morning I stood before the mirror, not to check my reflection, but to thank it. For years I had looked at that woman and only seen fatigue, lines etched from worry, hands that folded others' lives but rarely held her own. But now, I saw something else. Still tired, yes. Still weathered, but not hollow. I saw a woman who had survived humiliation without turning bitter. A woman who had been cast aside and still stood with both feet planted, heart open. A woman who had been called low-class trash and never once lowered her soul to match the insult. The world had tried to steal many things from me, my place, my pride, my voice. But it never took my decency. It never touched my ability to forgive without forgetting. It never bent the quiet strength passed down from my mother and hers before her. The strength that doesn't scream in rooms but stays when everyone else walks out. I reached into my drawer and took out the necklace Chad had made when he was 7. 3 plastic beads and a tiny heart. I put it on. Not because it was valuable, but because it was real. And in the end, that's all that remains. Not the houses, not the titles, not the gossip in crystal rooms, but the truths you lived and the peace you kept. Weeks passed. Winter melted into the earliest hints of spring. Wet sidewalks, soft wind, small buds peeking from cold branches. One morning, I received a letter from the Montclair estate. No return address. The handwriting was not Celeste's. Inside, a brief legal note confirming a quiet settlement. My father's claims had been acknowledged, absorbed, and honored. No threats, no denials, just closure. I didn't smile. I didn't celebrate. Instead, I walked out to my garden and buried the letter beneath the roses. Let them bloom from something finally put to rest. Later that day, Chad came over with groceries. He didn't bring gifts. He didn't bring explanations. He brought himself, present, whole. We made soup. We laughed about nothing. He set the table, poured the water, and pulled out my chair first. And in that simple gesture, no cameras, no crowd, no applause, I saw it. Justice. Not the kind written in courtrooms or shouted in family arguments. The kind that arrives when the people who once looked through you finally see you, truly, without needing to be told. He looked at me across the table and said, "I hope one day I make you proud." I didn't answer. I just reached across the table, took his hand in mine and squeezed gently. Because some truths don't need to be spoken. They're felt in silence, in warmth, in peace that no one gave you. But you grew anyway. That night I left the porch light on, not because I was waiting for anyone, but because I could. For years I turned it off early, worried about bills, about seeming too hopeful. There's a kind of dimming that happens in women like me, slow, invisible, until one day you forget how to glow at all. But not tonight. Tonight the house felt full, not of noise, of meaning. The photograph still sat framed on the shelf, the lace handkerchief folded beside it. The recipe box open, a cinnamon-scented page marked with flower fingerprints from Chad's last visit. I sat in my chair by the window, tea in hand, wrapped in the quiet kind of comfort that doesn't need to be named, and I watched that little porch light cast its glow over the walkway. A signal, not for rescue, but for return. Return to dignity, return to presence, return to the woman I had always been, before shame tried to rename me. Outside, the wind stirred the bare branches like an old lullaby. And inside, for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had to earn the space I lived in. I simply belonged. Because truth, like light, doesn't ask permission to shine. It just does. In the early hours, I woke to stillness, not the kind that comes from emptiness, but the kind that arrives after the storm is past, and the walls of your heart no longer creak under the weight of what was unspoken. I stood at the window, watching the horizon tint with the first lavender brush of dawn. It reminded me of the mornings I used to bake, before school, before work, before the world asked me to prove my worth. Now, there was nothing left to prove. The past had found its resting place. The humiliations had bloomed into strength, and the woman once called trash had turned silence into testimony. Outside, the first crocuses broke through the cold soil of my garden, tiny, defiant things pushing toward the light like they knew what waited for them. I made one final note in my journal. Respect isn't inherited. It's lived and earned every single day. Then I closed it, placed it gently in the cedar box with everything else that mattered, and I made tea. Not out of habit, but celebration. Because dignity, once reclaimed, is never lost again. And peace, the kind that doesn't rely on apologies or applause, had finally moved in. I sat by the window. The light stayed on. The truth stayed mine. And I stayed whole.